Well, good evening. It's still cold and I'm still freezing, but I'm out here in the room and I'm fixing to read some in the scripture. Um, I don't know how this will go, but I pray that maybe somebody will get something from it. Paul is the speaker here in the book of Ephesians. I'm in Ephesians chapter 6. And I'm at verse 10. I'm just going to read down. I'll make a few comments as I go along. This is nothing that a lot of people doesn't already know. I mean, a lot of people know it, but sometimes I think it's good that we repeat it and that we hear it, and we hear it for sure. I'm going to start with verse 10. Finally, my brethren, be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. The first way that you're strong is you have something on the inside that makes you strong. You can't get strong without having a personal relationship with Jesus, number one. He says in verse 11, put on the whole armor of God. Not just part of it. The whole armor. When the soldier goes into battle, they give him a gun, they give him a helmet, they give him shoes, they give him a shield, they give him all kinds of things. They give him everything in order for him to protect himself. Put on the whole armor of God that you may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. See, we wrestle, like the next verse says, for we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers, against rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. I just took a picture of the moon outside, and it's lacking maybe a little tiny bit of being full, but I believe it's as near full as it can get. And I just posted it, and I read on over there in Genesis about the lesser light. Well, we know that politics has nothing to do with the lesser light or the sun or the moon or the stars. We know that. And he's saying here, we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but spiritual wickedness in high places. Wherefore, take unto you the whole armor of God. Not part of it, but the whole armor as a whole. And then it lists the things that it's saying to put on. First of all, he says in verse 14, stand therefore, having your loins girt about with truth. You know, if you don't have truth inside of you, you don't know whether to shoot or whether you lay down and let the enemy go by you. We don't know. But see, it's talking about truth here. Having your loins girt about with truth, having on the breastplate of righteousness. That word righteousness means right standing with God. And your feet shod or covered with the preparation of the gospel of peace. See, the gospel of peace is so important. And above all, now listen to this, above all, taking the shield of faith, wherewith ye shall be able to quench all the fiery darts of the wicked. Now these darts are a lot like verse 12 up here where he says, we wrestle against principalities and powers and spiritual wickedness. But verse 17 says this, take the helmet of salvation. Most people think that the helmet of salvation starts inside the heart, and it could. My mind has to think of my need for the Lord. My mind has to feel that loneliness and that emptiness inside before it gets down in my heart. Now, Can my heart feel loneliness? Sure it can. Does the mind contribute to how I feel on the outside? Sure it does. He says here, take the helmet of salvation. Salvation is a word that I enjoy using every time I come up with a message. I walked out here and flipped the Bible open. And I've read this hundreds of times before, and I probably even spoke on it on some of my past videos. I looked online the other day, and I think I've got like 370 or almost 370 videos. So I'm sure that if I went back and looked, there probably would be one that would be similar to this. But it says in verse 17, take the helmet of salvation. What does the helmet cover up? Well, it covers up your head. It covers up your skeleton. It covers up the brain that makes you think. There's so many things that goes on inside the head that's mind-boggling. If I wanted to come out here and read to you, I could have brought a piece of paper out here and wrote down everything in the world that goes on in our head. And I could use the whole 30 minutes talking about what goes on in the head. But we all know what goes on in the head. We get our vision from our face. We get our speaking ability. We get our hearing ability. We have consciousness. We breathe from our mouth and from our nose. I mean, there's so many things that the helmet covers up. I was looking at Facebook, maybe it was, and you know, on certain areas, if you don't happen across a bunch of the garbage and filth, they have sometimes videos that are very interesting. And they had a video, this boy that had lost half of his skeletal lobe off the top of his head. The doctors went in and removed the bone of the top of his head. And you could see where one half of his top of his head was sunk down. It almost looked like a crater, but the boy was carrying the top of his head a lot like I'm carrying this wedge in my hand. He was carrying that bone. And what was amazing about it is that you could look down into the skeleton part and you would see where the lines was running, where the blood vessel was. And you could see where the blood vessel had made an indentation in the skeleton area. And it was feeding blood through that skeleton area to wherever it was going or wherever it was coming. And you could hold it in your hand. I don't know what he has in his head right now. I don't know if they replaced it with something else, but you can tell that he is definitely scarred for the rest of his life if they leave him like that. He had hair on top of the scalp. I mean, he had hair growing, but you could tell that it was almost like this side was going up and then it just fell like a half an inch. And then when it went across, it was really amazing to watch. He was basically holding his skull, the bone of his skull in his hand. And he was showing it to people and he was laughing to people about the bone that was in his head that was basically a relic that was left over. And he was showing it to people on YouTube and Facebook, showing it to someone. You know, the helmet that you and I need today is the helmet of salvation. Salvation begins with a knowledge that we need Jesus. I could come out here and give you a history lesson on the brain, I guess. I didn't want to do that. I just wanted to come out here and tell you about the boy that I seen that was missing the bone in his head. What that boy needs is the helmet of salvation, because his life is going to pass away one day. Now, he can make light of it to the world. He can hold up the bone of his brain and laugh about it all day long. But what happens if he loses his soul? That's going to be a harder thing to justify, is losing of your soul because you didn't have the helmet of salvation. Verse 17 says, and take the helmet of salvation. I heard a devotional from a man that I know. He doesn't know me at all, but I know him. I've watched a lot of his videos. I didn't get a chance to really listen as good as I would have liked to, but he was doing a notation of that word take. Now, you know, I don't come out here proclaiming that I know the Greek about nothing. I couldn't tell you nothing about it. But here's what I'm getting at. If I was to offer, let me think of something else to offer. That there just don't, yeah, let me just pick this up. This is just a board that I've got. It's a board that shows the day of my salvation. I used it in my church not long ago, and it shows how I nailed down salvation. So I can tell you when it was. It was 8/26 of 2007. That was the day that I got the helmet of salvation. I wasted a bunch of time. But say if I offered you something, it would behoove you to take it. My wife would have been very upset if she made a nice pot of soup tonight, a very good pot of soup, mind you. It would have been strange to her if I'd have said, no, I don't want that. That would have hurt her feelings. I eat 2 bowls of the soup. I'm talking about big bowls of the soup. It was good soup. It needed a little bit of salt, but it was good soup. Some of the best I believe she's ever made. I told her, I said, Deborah, you need to put a little bit of okra in it. She said, well, I don't like okra. I said, well, okra gives you that little bit of seasoning that soup needs, to have a little seasoning. Well, if I hadn't have got me the first bowl of that soup and found out that it needed just a tad bit of salt, I went and got the salt shaker and I put some salt in it, and it was good. See, I took that salt shaker and I added salt. What is he saying right here? And take the helmet of salvation. Meaning, here's what that means. God offers you salvation. He offers you the ability to understand that you need him. And yes, it might come from the center of your heart, but your brain makes a lot of the decisions that maybe might start in the heart, but your brain has to comprehend what it is you need to do. Yes, God comes into the heart of man. He doesn't come into the brain of man. But when he gets a hold of the heart, he gets a hold of the brain. Because this verse in 17 says, and take the helmet of salvation. And a lot of people don't know what that helmet is. I happen to have received this gift from my cousin. I even done a message on this. She bought me this little figurine. That little figurine right there doesn't have no face in it. It doesn't have no arms. It doesn't have no legs. It has a sword, and it has the breastplate, and it has the covering, and it even shows that it's even got the shoes down here. But it also shows that it has a helmet, And that helmet is molded for the fit of your head. However big your head is, it molds to your head. And here's the thing. God knows how to mold perfect salvation that you and I need. I needed it back then. This is my reminder. I had this reminder in front of me. If I'm not badly mistaken, I think I heard the man that I'm referring to, I believe he tells the story that when he was 12 years old, that he went to camp and somebody explained to him out of a little Gideon Bible, John 3:16, and how much that it made an impact on the man's life, to the point now, to listen to him, he's just amazing. What am I saying right here? He tells us right here to take the helmet of salvation. God is offering you salvation. Salvation is the word for being born again, meaning you hear the gospel. The gospel is the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. He lived for 33 years. They nailed him to a cross. They put nails in his hands and nails in his feet. They put the crown of thorns on his head. And they stabbed him in the side to release the water. And before they shoved the knife in him, he was already dead. He already said, "It is finished." You know, God gives salvation. And salvation is not unique to just one or two people. Salvation is for every person. So God says if we hear the gospel and we believe the gospel, just like John 5:24 tells us, if we hear the gospel and believe the gospel, then he gives us a gift. Just like I'm taking this Gideon Bible and I'm handing it to you. God left us a gift and he wants us to take it. Pretend your hand is like mine and you're reaching out and you're taking this gift. That's what God basically wants you to do. He's willing to give you the helmet of salvation. And not only that, he's willing to give you the sword of the Spirit. You know what the sword is? The weapon of the Spirit, which is the Word of God. You know, I thank the Lord that you can hear a testimony of some young little boy being loved on by somebody that cared enough to go to camp, to take that little Bible and share with that man the gospel. Amazing. God's willing to do that for you, and he's willing to put the helmet of salvation on you. Do you have the helmet of salvation? If you died today, do you know where you'd go? For a long time, I didn't. Oh, I played church. I was a professional church person. And I think that we can all get professional in our church days. But you have to ask yourself a question, did I have salvation if I would have died? Oh, they'd have had a nice funeral. They'd have had flowers on the casket. They would have had preachers probably saying all the nice things about Brother Ken. But only God really knew. I'm thankful. elderlyministry.com is the website. You'll see a link up at the top of the page that actually will send you to a phone number, and you're welcome to call that phone number. I promise you that if you call and leave a message, I will return your call. I got my name and the phone number. There's a many people that I try to reach out to, and nobody ever returns your call because nobody ever publishes a contact information. There's people today that has questions and they need somebody to talk to. So that's the reason I furnish my number on YouTube, so that in the event, if somebody was to call, then they could talk to somebody. Thank y'all for listening. Make sure you got the helmet of salvation on, okay? Thank y'all for watching.